Katia said that WILPF was very lucky to have me join. I think it was the other way around. When I see the Raging Grannies, and I loved your songs, I thought that was just amazing, moving, fun, but also poignant. And then when you see the incredible history that we have, and thank you to Charlotte and Robin for sharing those stories, because those women were absolutely magnificent. When you think of it, they didn't have the right to vote. They didn't have the ability to just get on a plane and nip over to Europe to try and stop a conflict like we can do. They had to plan, they had to work, they had to step outside of a mold in order to make those incredible journeys. And the intellectual wisdom that they brought, the scrutiny of the root causes of conflicts and what to do about it, was absolutely magnificent. And then that's us now. We inherit that mantle, and we are the ones now to try and contextualize and move it into this new century. Because the other thing I found interesting about the presentation was how little things have changed. I didn't know the First World War was all about the oil in the Middle East. But there you are, there it is. I didn't know that it was the gun manufacturers who were actually drivers of conflict. And yet here we are again, we just changed the names of the makers of the arms, and there we have them. Now it's Halliburton who have now got these $8 billion contract to go and build bases so that we can have future wars and more future wars and guarantee the oil supply. So nothing changes very much, which means that our activism doesn't change either. What it does mean is that we have to be more intelligent and contextualize and reorganize ourselves as to how we deal with the current conflict situations. In 1915, 1919, what came out of the conferences was that we would identify root causes, challenge militarism, invest in peace, and support the multilateral system. We still do all of those things, but we do it slightly differently, because the context had changed. So when Katia was talking about the different programs we have, what we're trying to do now is to show that all of those things work together. You can't do one without the other. You can't stop war without challenging militarism. You can't challenge war without identifying what those root causes are, pulling them out, identifying them, and then addressing them using the multilateral system. This is what we're trying to do. And I won't go into the details of what Peace Women does, what Reaching Critical Will does, what our Human Rights Program does, but essentially it is to try and pull all of those strands together so they all work seamlessly together to identify those root causes and then deal with them. I'm going to give a little example now how we've been trying to use that in real life. When I was in Bosnia, it was very clear to me that what was happening on the ground from a women's perspective was not being heard. What was going on was there was a narrative that had been created by warring factions, that had been repeated by the international community, that was going into the multilateral system. Multilateral system was responding on those voices. So those women, and there's some men, who were opposing that narrative, never got their voices heard, end up in a peace agreement which was destructive of any future for Bosnia to live in sustainable peace. And we're still at that stage. This is what we have to avoid. And so what we've been trying to do now is to develop a system whereby those grassroots voices are heard. And it is their narrative, their description, their real experience, which then inform how the United Nations and other international bodies should devise their policies to respond, with the aim that we will have then sustainable endings of conflict that will lead to true peace and true democracy. I'll give you an example of what we've tried to do in Syria. Strangely, we are very much engaged in the MENA region because the MENA region where the oil is obviously one of the areas where there is greatest conflict in the world at the moment. So in Syria, we started to engage 3 years ago with the most amazing women. It is amazing, is it not, that whenever there is a conflict, you will find amazing women who will stand up and oppose those conflicts. The Syrian women, you probably won't even know most of this because it doesn't make the newspapers. They've been organizing for change since the beginnings of the conflict. They have been trying to work together. They found the different NGOs, there weren't many who existed before, have found others, built networks, are working together to do locally brokered peace agreements, to try to find ways of bringing humanitarian assistance in, to try to find ways of doing prisoner exchanges, of documentation, of working on sexual violence and how to respond to it. It's all happening, but it's happening in pockets. But it works, and we've been giving them that support. Of course, that has not made it into the international system, because in the peace processes, we've had this binary narrative again. We've had men with guns talking to other men with guns, an absolute absence of thinking of what it is that needs to be done to really change that discourse. So when we had Mr. Brahimi, who was then the mediator, his great idea was to bring these guys to Geneva, stick them in a 5-star hotel at the top of one of the beautiful mountains. They would just, carve up the country between them, and it would all be done. That's what we did in Afghanistan. It worked there. Doesn't work in Syria. We were trying to get women to the table. Those fabulous women who were organizing, who knew what was happening at grassroots level, who could provide a different story, to bring them to the table to actually advise as to what a real peace would look like. They were blocked. They were blocked by the United Nations more than anybody else. The member states, some of them were really pushing to have them there. But they were blocked. The peace agreements never happened. Peace process failed. And we're back where we started, with a different mediator, but with the same narrative, because he's still not talking to the women. But we will fix that. But in the interim, what we did was we took women from Syria to Bosnia, because the women of Bosnia, we'd been working with them to do their own retrospective, to find out what it was that they had tried so hard to achieve and felt they had not. And of course, it turned out they had done an amazing job on trafficking, on domestic violence, on trying to push for participation in political life, on trying to get economic growth going for them. But it hadn't been working because the institutionalization of the conflict had happened as a result of a peace process they were not part of. So they worked with the Syrians to show how you organize, how you actually organize for change in the middle of a conflict, what to avoid, what works, what doesn't work. And the Syrians poked them. This was the brilliance of the Syrians coming, because a lot of them were younger. They're saying, why isn't anybody here young? And the Bosnians were saying, well, we were young when we started. And we know that one. But they're still going. They're still going. We have introduced a younger dynamic to them. But what they were able to say was, you've got demonstrations going off down the road. You have at the beginnings of a revolution. What are you doing for it? And they went, right, okay, fine. And by the end of the day, they had got their list of demands, and they'd gone off to the middle of Sarajevo, and they'd put the women's demands into these plenums, as they called them. So things started to move, and I still go back to Bosnia. We're still working in Bosnia. They are now organizing for change themselves, partly because of this incredible spur that they got from the Syrian women. They felt they owed it to the Syrian women. The Syrian women now say, we will do the same. We have learnt from our conflicts. Our role now, if anybody has to go through the hell that we're going through, we'll share it. We will actually share what we've done and how to organize. So the new approach that we have got, which builds on everything that WILPF has been doing before, and WILPF brought women from different parts of the former Yugoslavia to Geneva before to try and get them to participate in peace processes, only to have the door of the United Nations shut very firmly against them. So this is not new, but it's different. It's different in as much as now we know better how to work at grassroots level, what are the different areas of concern that need to be addressed, and how to bring them into the multilateral system. So with this new rapid response is we use all the different programs of WILPF, Peace Women, Reaching Critical Will, and the Human Rights Program, from grassroots to bring them into the multilateral forum so their voices can be heard. So we will take them to the Human Rights Council, where they can participate in the debates that are going on in the Council, where we can do side events, so we can arrange for them to have bilateral meetings to actually explain to member states why it is that their voices must be heard and why the policies need to be addressed, changed, in order to address what it is that they're saying. It's not a panacea, it doesn't work all the time, but it changes some of the dynamics. By bringing the Syrian women into that fora, we got a huge traction. We got the United States, the United Kingdom, France, the Nordic countries, all to change their positions on women's participation, because they heard what these women were saying and they realized that's where the solutions lie. So by doing this, we increase the presence, we increase the reality of what is happening, the reality within the multilateral system, that is, as to reflect what's happening on the ground. We can use the Security Council, and we can use the multilateral fora in relation to disarmament talks, the Arms Trade Treaty, to try and make sure that there is adherence to that in relation to the supply of arms. Again, it's not a panacea, but it is starting to make progress. It is starting to change some of the language, and we have access to the people who are the decision makers, who are the policy makers. Sounds good, and we will do more. We will do much more. and we want to increase the capacity of our sections in countries. We've got a fantastic job being done by Joy and our colleagues in Nigeria. Cameroon, they're doing this, beginning to start really working towards providing peace and bringing that, raising that attention of what's happening in Cameroon into the international community. But, and this is the sad thing, and this is something that I addressed this morning, so I apologize to those people who heard me speak today when I was cross, because I am still cross. And one of the reasons I'm cross is that we are sitting here in New York at the 20th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Plan of Action. It is the 15th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda started by Security Council Resolution 1325. 8,700 women in New York. We're never together. We are marginalized. We sit in places like this. This is a lovely venue. But we sit in small places where there's wind howling and there's somebody shouting next door so you can't hear. And we try to address our issues. We try to link thematically. But you don't know. You don't know how strong this movement is. We don't get to share en masse what it is that is happening in different parts of the world. We don't get to engage with those people in the United Nations who are the decision makers. So right now we have essentially a bunch of predominantly men over there in the United Nations who've drafted an outcome document which we weren't allowed to contribute to. All of us running around talking to each other, doing amazing work from grassroots right the way through, none of it meeting together. And this is our multilateral system, and this is why I'm angry, because I believe in the multilateral system. WILPF has helped to create that multilateral system. It is the only thing we have which is ostensibly to keep the peace. Never forget, the United Nations is the biggest peace organization in the world, although yeah, I forgive you for forgetting. It is supposed to be, and we need to drag it back to its first principle. So what's going wrong? And for me, having experienced it from the inside, and now working with it still, there is an institutionalized culture of masculinity.
Yes.
And therein lies our problem. And I use masculinity not about men, but just the male values that have been institutionalized in that organization. And we can't gate crash that. We think we have because we have the Security Council resolutions. We think we have because we have Beijing. We have tried and tried and tried to get our voices heard, but we get blocked. We just met with the American ambassador, charming, lovely woman, and she suddenly realized that she was actually doing the same thing as they're doing, not raising the issues when it comes to participation of women in peace agreements, forgetting that that's part of the agenda. So it was great we met her because now she's reminded, oh, now we'll do something. But it's not consistent. We're still on the outside looking in, banging on the door. And this is what we've got to do now. Because we've created something which has gone away from us. We need to take it back. Several ways I think we need to do that. One is we don't abandon it, we work with it. And by working with it, that means using our toolkit, getting women in there to tell the truth to their power. Making sure that when there is a potential for a peace agreement or any other system or process ongoing, we get our voices there. But we look at who it is we're talking to. We look at it as what they are doing. The he for she, the gender equality narrative is now the one that's dominating. It's coming out all the time through this CSW. What are we talking about? I don't know. And I'm not that dumb. You know, gender equality, what is gender? Gender equality would be women's role being the same as a man's role and everybody be living happily ever after. No change whatsoever, just count a few more women and stick them into some political system. Or even more likely, get a few more women, stick them into somebody's military.
Yeah.
And then we've made war safe for women, right?
Right.
That's not what the Security Council resolutions are all about, not at all. What we need to do is rethink that sloganizing which we've been sold and think behind it, because what we're really talking about is structures of power and how those structures of power impact differently on men and women and who controls them. It's patriarchy, it's capitalism, to name but two. And then we see then how that differently impacts on men of different color, women of different color, transgendered people, people with low economic incomes. It's not black and white. It is not simple. You can't just compare one with the other and say, now, let's increase it. One of the guys we work with said today, it's not about taking a piece of a poison pie and thinking that's fine. No. It's about transformative change. That's what we're here for. It's about changing that dynamic of what causes conflict, looking at those root causes, identifying them as to who's got the power, how they're using that power, how do we take that power back by looking at the impact it has on all of us. That's why we engage with men. Not because we want men to support us alone. It's because we want men to address the creation of these masculinities, which don't do them any favors either. You know, there was a meeting on Ukraine just on Tuesday, I think it was, and it was with women we have been working with, but fortunately not this particular woman who spoke. She was from the ministry. And she was so proud that she'd sent off her son to go and fight for 6 months, even though he's not well. And I was thinking, hang on, wait a minute. Her son's not well. She sends him off to fight. She's very proud. What is he thinking? He can't be that well happy with what's happened to him. But that's the narrative. He's the warrior. He's got to go. She's the mother. She's got to send him. This is World War I all over again with the white ribbons and whatever it is that you have to do to send people off. It's the gendered roles which we have to understand, deconstruct, change. So, just to close, because we have to be out of here, what we're going to do is we're going to organize. And so that's what women do best. We regroup, re-strategize, and start again. In The Hague next year, we're going to be 100 years old. This year. It's been pending for so long, and now it's almost, I'm panicking. This year, next month, oh God, we're going to be 100 years old, and we're going to have a great party. Yes, of course we're going to have a great party. But we're also going to do something else. We're going to examine the root causes of conflict in today's world. We're going to look in our plenaries, we're going to start by looking at where we are in terms of the political economy. How do power structures work? Who's got it? Who needs it? Who has been exiled or excluded from it? How do masculinities work? And why does that lead to violence? Second one, when you've identified how all that works, we're going to look at and identify how that leads to militarization, and how militarization and the use of arms and the sale, the production of arms, and how much money is made on that then leads to the causation of conflict in the first place, back to our first panel, because there's no money to put into real and sustainable, not growth, real and sustainable social structure reform. From that, we want to look at how do you get to fix it? What is it we need to do? What's wrong with our multilateral system? How do we engage with it? How do we turn it back into something that we can use that's going to work for all of us? And it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge not because these things aren't known, because I think between all the brilliant people we have here in New York and all the brilliant people we have coming to this conference, we know most of the answers. What we don't know is how to put all the different pieces together. How do we actually create a new social movement which is going to end war? And it's our responsibility to take the leadership, as WILPF has always done, in pushing for just that agenda. So the challenge will be, is not what we're going to demand of governments, not what we're going to demand of the United Nations, but it's what we're going to demand of ourselves. Because we're the best one in the world. We are putting so much energy into telling them what they need to do. And they just say, oh, thank you very much. And they take it, and they put it on a shelf. We know what we need to do. We have to then take that power ourselves, take ownership of it. We drive the agenda, and we make them do what we need them to do so that we can bring peace. So I hope every single one of you will be in The Hague next month for a wild party. She's already jumping a bit for the wild party. A wild party, and then the launching of this fabulous new movement for change that we hope will bring an end to conflict in our lifetimes. Thank you very much indeed.